Mary Riley was a big girl now, nearly 6, and she decided that morning to sleep in Mommy's bed because it smelled like her. She'd awoken around 5 a.m. with a high fever, and Mommy had to call Mrs. Van Meer, the suburb's most respected and efficient babysitter, to come to the house early before breakfast time. She'd once been a nurse many years ago, the kind that helped doctors make little children like her better, so she knew exactly how to take care of Mary. Mommy couldn't stay home because she had an important meeting she couldn't miss, and Mrs. Van Meer would make sure Mary was fed and taken care of and call the doctor if necessary. Mary didn't like her because she was bossy and didn't tolerate bad behavior or too much TV, but the grey-haired, chubby granny was never mean and always brought her candy, which Mary looked forward to and appreciated. As soon as Mommy had left the house, Mrs. Van Meer had returned Mary to bed after her breakfast of toast and a fried egg, Mary's favorite breakfast at the moment, and made sure she was tucked in and dozing off before she'd close the door and leaving it open just a crack in case Mary called for her. She'd then gone back downstairs to make herself a cup of strong coffee with the fancy new coffee maker Mommy had bought recently, and Mary had fallen asleep with the yummy aromas of coffee and toast floating through the house. She had no idea how long she'd slept when she was awoken by the strangest noise. At first, Mary thought one of her idiot boy neighbors was responsible for the hollow trumpet sound that made all the hairs on her arms stand up. But then she remembered that they were in school at this time of the day. She was very proud of the fact that she could read time perfectly now on every clock, whether it had numbers or hands. On the bedside table, Mommy's digital clock said 10:05, which meant she'd been asleep for almost 3 hours. Groggy and a little unsteady on her feet, Mary pushed off the light covers, slid off the bed onto the soft carpet, and padded to the window to look out. She could hardly make out the house across the street because everything was white, and she realized that it was very misty. Or was it fog? She couldn't remember the difference. The odd sound echoed all around her again, and she jumped. It was coming from outside the house, as though from the sky, but it sounded like it was inside too. It made her skin tingle and her ears ring, and she stuck a finger in each ear and wiggled them about to stop the itching. She was feeling decidedly weird on top of still feeling warm and clammy, like her skin was crawling, and she shivered. A sudden loud bump downstairs made her gasp, and she walked quietly to the door and stuck her head out to listen. Mary quickly withdrew back inside the room and felt her heart beating very fast in her chest. Why was she feeling so afraid? It was only Mrs. Van Meer, most probably doing some housework. She insisted on a clean environment and frequently lectured Mary on how important it was to be a clean person and live in a clean house because cleanliness is next to godliness, according to Mrs. Van Meer. It was her favorite saying, and she said it often enough to be annoying. There was another loud thud, followed by a creak and a scrape. And this time, Mary decided she wasn't going to be scared and bravely stepped out onto the landing. House cleaning hurt nobody, she told herself as she walked stealthily to the top of the stairs to peek down, where she could see the entrance hall and front door. It was eerily quiet now. She put one foot on the top step and waited. Nothing. Another step turned into 5 more until a different, softer noise, like someone sighing, halted her descent. She was about halfway down the stairs now, and she could see the sitting room through the wooden bars of the railing. This time, the sound was one she recognized. After Mommy and Daddy had gotten divorced and Daddy left town to work in the city, Mommy had bought Mary a puppy to make her feel better. She never told Mommy how glad she was that Daddy no longer lived with them because he was a mean person who yelled at her and Mommy a lot. One morning after breakfast, Daddy had argued with Mommy in the kitchen and told her she was a terrible wife and other ugly words Mary didn't understand but knew were bad. When she'd seen Mommy's tears and how unhappy and angry she was, Mary had started to sob, and that's when Daddy's furious eyes had turned on her and he stormed towards her with his arm up and his face all red and twisted. Mommy had quickly placed herself between them, and Mary had never forgotten the sound his hand made on Mommy's beautiful face. She blamed herself for what he'd done to Mommy, and if she hadn't been crying, Daddy would not have tried to hit her. Mommy had a big blue bruise on her cheek the next day, and Mary had felt very guilty about it. Mary had never really understood why Daddy was always angry, but the day after he tried to hurt her, Mommy told him to leave and threatened to call the sheriff if he ever came back to the house or tried to see Mary without her permission. A few months later, Mommy sat her down at the kitchen counter and explained to her what divorce meant and that Daddy would only ever come to the house again if Mary wanted him to. But Mary had never wanted him back. And the next day, a cute, fluffy puppy named Scruffy had arrived at the house wearing a big red bow around his neck. He took away most of her sadness, but she still sometimes missed Daddy. Mary recognized Scruffy's whine coming from the kitchen, but what scared her was when it turned into a low growl, like he was scared or upset. She took another 2 courageous steps down so that she could peep under the landing and deeper into the sitting room that had a big double door that led into the kitchen. At first, she saw an empty room, but then Scruffy came into view and he was backing away from something. His head was low and his eyes were narrow and his little white teeth were bared in a snarl. Mary held her breath and stared at her best friend in surprise. She'd never seen him like that before. He was always happy and bouncy and loved playing with her. Scruffy's growl grew louder, followed by a few sharp yaps. And when he crouched lower, Mary risked another step down. A large, odd-looking shadow suddenly loomed over him and Mary froze. The odd-looking shadow gave her goosebumps and her heart started beating very fast again. Like Scruffy, she was feeling scared and threatened. What Mary saw next had her scurrying upstairs so fast she tripped and bruised her knee on the top step. A very skinny, grey arm with a hand that didn't look like anything she had seen before reached towards Scruffy, and on the tips of each finger were sharp, black, curved claws. By the time she reached the bedroom, she heard Scruffy yelp and then something snap. And she ran inside and slammed the door. Mary began to weep and her breath came out in loud, short gasps. Whatever she'd seen, she knew instinctively it was very, very bad. And by slamming the door, she told the thing downstairs that she was home and upstairs.